Look at the sheer violence of the AI arms race right now. Everyone is panic building gigawatt data centers. The hyperscalers are burning hundreds of billions of dollars, hoarding GPUs, and fighting over nuclear power contracts just to keep their servers from melting into the bedrock. The entire market is obsessed with the centralized cloud. And in the middle of this historic trillion-dollar war, where is Apple? To the casual observer, they look completely behind. They look like a fancy phone maker, pushing incremental camera upgrades and trying hard to sell cheap laptops to students, while the rest of the world builds the future. Many think Apple missed the war, but if you understand the physics of compute, you know that silence isn't a retreat, it is an ambush. Apple isn't losing the AI war. They're executing a system-level phase transition. They're refusing to play the commoditized, centralized cloud software game. Instead, they're moving the entire macroeconomic battlefield to the physical edge. Welcome to Growth. I'm Sean, your guide to money and navigating the frontier of innovation. Today, we're going to strip away the noise and look at the actual mechanism of how Apple is weaponizing AI compute cycle. We will break down why sending every query to a centralized cloud is structurally doomed, how Apple's new silicon architecture turns consumer hardware into an industrial weapon, and why the biggest threat to OpenAI's multi-billion-dollar valuation isn't a smarter algorithm. It is a macroeconomic intercept delivered straight from your pocket. First, we need to start the actual physical reality of computation. Right now, the media treats artificial intelligence like it's magic. They call it the cloud. It sounds weightless. It sounds invisible. But the mainstream AI model is geographical and physical nightmare. Every time you open a chatbot to draft a simple email or ask it to summarize a legal PDF, you're triggering a massive, highly inefficient industrial supply chain. Think about the physical journey of a single text prompt. When you hit send, your words do not stay on your phone. They're converted into pulses of light. They have to physically travel through fiber optic cables across states and sometimes under oceans, just to reach a massive data center. And when your prompts finally get there, it hits a server rack packed with traditional AI chips. For decades, the tech industry played a simple game. Make the microscopic switches on a chip smaller, and you can pack more of them together to get faster speeds. But we have hit a brutal wall of physics. The switches on these AI chips are now so microscopically tiny, approaching the size of individual atoms, that the electricity literally leaks out of them. They bleed heat. We're physically incapable of packing more computing power into that silicon without melting the metal into slag. Because of this heat barrier, a modern AI data center is no longer just a building with computers. It is a heavy industrial furnace. To stop these chips from literally catching fire when millions of people ask an AI a question, the tech monopolies are having to build gigawatt-scale infrastructure. They are routing entire rivers of water through cooling pipes. They're fighting over nuclear reactor contracts just to keep the servers from melting into the bedrock. In plain terms, the cloud is a thermodynamic trap. You cannot scale global human intelligence if every single time a human being has a thought, a factory in Virginia has to boil 1,000 gallons of water. The energy math simply collapses. And this is where Apple is executing its phase transition. Apple looked at the cloud, realized the physics were structurally doomed, and spent the last 5 years moving the factory directly into the silicon. and they are deploying it in a highly calculated, three-tiered hardware strategy. Layer 1 is the blunt force of physical distribution. This is the new $599 MacBook Neo. You don't defeat a massive centralized monopoly by building a slightly better centralized server. You defeat them by saturating the physical world with cheap, localized hardware. Apple isn't putting their most expensive desktop chips in the Neo. They're putting the A18 Pro, a hyper-efficient smartphone brain, into a cheap laptop shell. By aggressively pushing this low-cost hardware into schools, enterprise fleets, and emerging markets, they're creating a massive, decentralized swarm of local neural engines. These machines don't need to run massive, godlike cloud models. They run small, highly optimized local models to handle your daily friction: scheduling, drafting, reading, and organizing. But cumulatively, this sheer volume intercepts billions of daily queries that used to travel to OpenAI and Google. It starves the cloud of its revenue at the exact moment the query is born. Layer 2 is the heavy edge, the pro-grade machines, like the M-series MacBook Pros. For years, the tech media has said the same lazy narrative. They said Apple started building their own silicon just to escape Intel, because Intel's chips were getting too hot and too slow. This is fundamental misunderstanding of what Apple actually did. Escaping Intel was just a convenient side effect. The reality is much more radical. Apple was looking 10 years into the future, and they saw the physical bottleneck of artificial intelligence before anyone else. If you try to run a heavy AI model on a high-end Windows PC today, you hit a structural wall. The computer's main brain, the processor, and the graphics card are the two separate physical entities. To think, the data has to travel back and forth across a narrow physical bridge on the motherboard. We call this a bottleneck. It creates a massive data traffic jam. The processor spends all its time just waiting for data to cross the bridge. Apple realized that artificial intelligence is not constrained by how fast the processor is. It is constrained by how fast you can move the memory. So, they executed a ruthless architectural pivot. They built a unified memory architecture. They smashed the processor and the graphics card onto the exact same piece of silicon and surrounded with one massive shared pool of memory. There's no physical bridge. There's no traffic jam. The data flows instantaneously. By doing this years before the AI boom, Apple quietly built the ultimate local inference engine. This architecture allows a single developer sitting in a coffee shop to run a massive, highly complex, open source AI model directly on their laptop, completely off the grid, with zero latency. They are running enterprise-grade artificial intelligence on a battery-powered device, simply because Apple saw the physics of the memory wall a decade before the rest of the market. And then you reach the apex. Layer 3, the Agentic Hub, the standalone desktops, from the Mac Mini to the Mac Studio. This is the macroeconomic checkmate. Laptops are incredible inference engines, but they are ultimately bound by the physics of portability. They have battery anxiety. They have physical, thermal limits. Eventually, they have to sleep. But what happens when you remove the battery? A Mac Studio is plugged directly into the grid. It has massive thermal headroom and a copper cooling architecture that never throttles. It never sleeps. Apple is not positioning these standalone desktops as just rendering machines for video editors anymore. They're positioning them as always-on, localized command hub. While you're asleep, your Mac Studio sits quietly on your desk, acting as a relentless, multi-agent engine. It is autonomously scraping financial data, parsing your local documents, executing code, and acting as the central brain, orchestrating the swarm of smaller Apple devices in your ecosystem. You no longer need to rent compute from a server farm in Virginia to run an autonomous AI agent. You physically own the server. Apple isn't just selling you a consumer electronic device anymore. They are arming you with a decentralized personal data center. And the absolute beauty of this three-tiered architecture, no cloud software monopoly on earth can bypass it. Because Apple owns the glass you tap on, the silicon that runs the math, and the physical memory that binds it all together. They control the physical edge, and the entity that controls the edge dictates the future of the cloud. To understand how lethal this three-tiered hardware swarm is, you have to look at how the big four, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and xAI, actually make their money. They operate a walled garden monopoly. If you want to use their intelligence, your data has to leave your device and enter their cloud. And every single time your data crosses their border, they charge you a tiny fraction of a cent. In the tech industry, they call this an API call. But in plain English, it is a toll booth. And right now, those toll booths are getting incredibly expensive because the nature of artificial intelligence is changing. We are moving from simple chatbots to autonomous AI agents. First, we need to understand the difference between the large language model and the protocol that enables AI agents. A large language model, like GPT-4 or Meta's Llama, is just a brain. It is a highly advanced predictor of words, but a brain trapped in a jar cannot do anything. It cannot read your local files. It cannot push code to GitHub. And it cannot manage your calendar. It just talks. To actually execute tasks, you need an agentic protocol. And right now, the developer community is converging on one dominant open source framework, OpenClaw. OpenClaw is the nervous system and the hands. It is a self-hosted, open source AI assistant that lives directly on your machine. You talk to it through the apps you already use, like WhatsApp, Telegram, or Discord. Instead of just answering a question, the OpenClaw protocol allows the AI to autonomously read your file system, execute shell commands, and manage your inbox. It actually acts on your behalf. But here's the economic trap of the cloud. When an AI agent is working, it doesn't just ask the brain one question. It thinks in continuous loops. It makes a plan, asks the brain to verify it, tries an action, asks the brain if it worked, and tries again. If you're running an agent through a cloud provider, every single one of those internal thoughts crosses the toll booth. Cloud AI is a rental model because the cloud charges per token. Developers running continuous, looping cloud agents are getting crushed by API fees, often spending massive amounts of capital just to keep their agents thinking. It is financially unsustainable to rent your intelligence when your AI is running 24/7. This is the exact vulnerability Apple is exploiting. They are aggressively pushing the developer community to run this agentic protocol locally. Apple's machine learning team released a framework called MLX. It was built specifically to run open source AI models natively and hyper efficiently on Apple Silicon. Because of MLX, developers can now download highly capable, free, open source models like Meta's Llama and pair them directly with the OpenClaw protocol right on their Mac. In fact, OpenClow's massive popularity is already creating a physical shortage of high-end Macs because developers realize they need Apple's unified memory architecture to run these agents effectively. And this triggers the macroeconomic intercept. Let's say you ask your phone to look at your calendar, book a flight to Tokyo, and draft a summer email to your boss. In the old paradigm, a cloud agent has to cross OpenAI's toll booth 50 times to compute that loop. But in the Apple architecture, the OpenCloud agent running on your operating system intercepts your request. It realizes, I don't need a massive, expensive cloud brain to do this. It routes the task to a free, open source model running natively on your laptop via the MLX framework. Because you physically own the hardware, your cost to run that agent is exactly zero. The data never leaves your device. The cloud toll booth sits empty. By combining physical edge hardware with the OpenCloud protocol, Apple intercepts the query before it ever reaches the highway. They mathematically starve the cloud monopolies of the recurring revenue they desperately need to pay off their gigawatt data centers. Now, the keen investors will push back. They will say, Sean, this local hardware swarm is great for booking flights and reading emails. But what about massive, complex reasoning workloads? The edge cannot do everything. Sometimes you absolutely need a giant cloud. They're right. The physical edge has limits, and Apple knows it. But instead of building a traditional data center to solve this, Apple built a cryptographic fortress. They call it Private Cloud Compute, or PCC. When your local Mac or iPhone hits the workload that is physically too heavy for its own silicon, it doesn't just hand your data over to the open web. It securely encrypts your prompt and sends it to Apple's custom-built server nodes. But here's the brutal, structural difference between Apple's cloud and the rest of the industry. When Apple's server receives your data, it calculates the answer, sends it back to your device, and then does something radical. It completely wipes the memory. It operates statelessly. In computer architecture, a stateless system has zero memory of the past. The data is mathematically destroyed. There is no log, there's no backup, there's no data scraped to train their next AI model. This isn't just PR privacy feature. It is a calculated, cryptographic moat designed specifically to break Google. Think about the clash of these two Goliaths. Google is a $2 trillion monopoly, but they are entirely dependent on behavior extraction. Their core business relies on hoarding, analyzing, and monetizing your personal data to feed their global advertising engine. If Google builds a stateless cloud, if they mathematically destroy your data the second after they process it, their advertising revenue collapses. They are structurally, economically incapable of copying Apple's architecture. As we hand more and more of our lives over to autonomous AI agents, our bank records, our medical history, our private communications, the market will demand absolute security. You cannot let an open-ended cloud agent ingest your company's proprietary data if you know the cloud provider is using it to train a public model. If Apple handles personal data on the edge and through PCC, what happens when you ask your phone a broad word knowledge question? Something that requires a massive trillion parameter cloud brain like ChatGPT. Apple didn't spend $50 billion to build a ChatGPT clone. They just integrated ChatGPT directly into the operating system. And how much did Apple pay OpenAI for this unprecedented access to hundreds of millions of users? exactly $0. Why did OpenAI take a deal where they burn their own compute for free? Because Apple understands the absolute law of gravity in the tech sector. Distribution is the ultimate currency. OpenAI was so desperate for top-of-the-funnel consumer access that they agreed to be an unpaid tenant on Apple's land. They're betting they can convert those Apple users into paying $20 a month subscribers. But here's the final checkmate. Apple didn't just get the smartest cloud brain in the world for free. They turned OpenAI into a tenant, and eventually the landlord always collects the rent. They are cutting off the low-level API revenue with their local hardware swarm. They are starving Google of data using stateless cryptography or private cloud compute. And they are forcing OpenAI to burn their own compute capital just for the privilege of existing on an iPhone. If you strip away the hype and look at the brutal physical reality, you'll see the era of the centralized AI cloud monopoly is peaking. The industry is violently bifurcating based on the pure physics of compute. On one side, you have the massive liquid-cooled hyperscalers doing the heavy lifting. They are burning billions to train the foundational models in the desert. But the execution, the actual monetizable interface with reality, is migrating to the edge. And this is where the unusual macroeconomic alliance might form. Look at Meta. Mark Zuckerberg is spending tens of billions of dollars to train Llama, and then he's giving it away for free. Why? Because he knows that if OpenAI or Google owns the foundational brain of the internet, Meta becomes a tenant on their land. So Zuckerberg is setting billions on fire to commoditize the model layer and protect his 3 billion user advertising fortress. He wants to ensure no one can ever charge a toll for intelligence. Apple is taking Meta's free brain, pairing it with the OpenClaw Agentic framework, and running it on Apple Silicon. And do you know who really sees this phase transition coming? Look at the man who sells the picks and shovels. Look at Nvidia's Jensen Huang. Why is the CEO of the company that makes all of its money selling cloud GPUs suddenly throwing his weight behind open source edge-based agentic frameworks like NemoClaw? Because he's executing a massive economic hedge. Nvidia owns the training hardware monopoly. They sell the chips that build the brains. But Jensen knows that if Apple makes local edge inference the global standard, every enterprise and sovereign nation will rush to build their own custom AI models to run on that edge. And to train those sovereign models, they have to buy massive clusters of Nvidia chips. Nvidia and Apple are quietly carving up the global AI board. Nvidia taxes the creation of intelligence, and Apple taxes the physical distribution of it. If you're an AI software company, whether you're a startup building agents or a foundational giant like OpenAI or Anthropic, you're trapped in the middle. You're forced to pay Nvidia's massive hardware premiums just to build your model. But you cannot reach the consumer without passing through Apple's gate. And as we've seen, Apple is actively weaponizing free open source software to ensure you can never charge a premium for your product. In the tech sector, the absolute law of gravity remains true. The entity that controls the physical edge controls the user. And the entity that controls the user holds the power to starve the cloud. So here's the real question for you. When a free, open source agent can run flawlessly and securely on a local laptop, how does the market radically reprice the cloud? And who will capture the value of this revolution? the algorithm that thinks, or the metal it lives on? Let me know your take in the comments below. This was Sean from BuySpark. If you enjoyed video, press like, subscribe, and don't forget the notification. And if you want the deep dive report with the full citations and the market breakdown, subscribe to our newsletter at the link below. Thank you for watching. Until next time.